Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are. Thank you for taking time to watch this video. It is January 21st, and obviously for those in America, that means that we now have a new president. And, it's one of those things that I'm struggling with it, and I know a lot of people are. And here's the thing. I am not somebody who was a diehard Donald Trump, President Trump fan. I think he was good, and I wanted him to stay. But I wasn't at the point where, I worshiped the ground he walked on or anything. And I've never been like that with any politician. Never been that way. I don't really trust any of them. But I think he came with a different angle that most of us were not prepared for. And there was a lot of stuff that, questionable as far as character and things like that people were concerned with. And I think in some cases rightly so, okay? So I'm trying to put that out there to show that I am not the kind of guy who worshiped Donald Trump in the ground he walked on. I am not that guy. However, I am the guy who looked at what he did and saw what he did specifically for me as a ministry leader, okay? For me being in ministry, and for me understanding the needs of the ministry and gathering that there were certain protections of the Christian ministries and Christians in general, actually, but that certain things had been stripped away over the years. And he really did some amazing things that protected us in ways that I don't think we necessarily realized we needed protection. And so, he did things where he started reversing the Johnson Amendment. For those of you who don't know, the Johnson Amendment, basically, President Johnson Lyndon B. Johnson decided that there was no way he was going to win an election with the Christians being able to speak out against him as a politician. So the Johnson Amendment then said, hey, what we need to do is strip churches of their ability to tell people who to vote for. And so what he did was he said, if you're an IRS agency or an IRS 501c3, which is what most churches are, you can no longer tell your congregation how to vote. You can't give political advice. He ended up winning the election, and that's history. The problem is that became common theology for most Christians in America, that's actually how it should work. The government and church should be that kind of separate and have nothing together with each other. And so that's where a lot of the theology comes, that the separation of church and state goes that far, that churches shouldn't have a political insight. Well, that's actually not true. If you look at the founding fathers, they believe completely that faith, God, and policy and political policy, government, all had to run together. You can't have one without the other, was the thing that they said. That divine inspiration had to be the backing for government, or else the government would become corrupt. And that's what we're seeing now. I mean, and we've been seeing it for years on both sides of the ticket. So it's not even a Republican Democrat issue. It's whatever. Okay, so you take all these things that President Trump did, where he brought some of these things to light. He gave certain religious freedoms back, things that we had lost and we had given up. And he brought these things back and really fought for it. Now, again, he was not the most ethical person when it came to some of his personal life and the things he said and things like that, okay? So in order to go down that road, and before we throw him out and say, well, so he's just a bad human being, we need to look at some of the people in the Bible before we go down that road, okay? David, who is probably the most famous guy, King David, in the Bible, aside from Jesus, he has this thing where he's a murderer. He sends this guy off to war to die so he can have that guy's wife. He lusted for a woman. He lied. He just did all sorts of things. I mean, David was really a scummy guy at the end of the day, okay? But yet the Bible tells us that David was a man after God's own heart, and that God considered him almost, I think the term is actually a friend, that's how much God respected David. and that David had earned God's respect in some way. So it must have been through the repentance, or it was through his desire to serve God, even though he was a bad person altogether. Okay, so my point is, and there's many others. Samson was under this special protection as long as he kept all of these, he kept all these rules and things about himself, and he broke all of them. Right? It's considered that he was probably under the Daniel fast for his entire life or something of that. And so he wasn't supposed to be with an unclean woman. He wasn't supposed to eat unclean foods. He wasn't supposed to do this, and he wasn't supposed to do that. And there's like a whole list of things he wasn't supposed to do that he did. Yet God still granted him the power to topple the temple at the end of his life, as his eyes are gouged out and everything like that. Adam and Eve completely blew it. God still cared for them. There was a punishment that came, but he still cared for them. My point is that, and even Judas, I mean, we know that Judas was stealing money throughout his whole time in ministry, and yet God still managed to use him in the ministry. So to say that because of Donald Trump's ethical dilemmas, he shouldn't be respected by Christians actually does not fit biblical narrative, and you need to be aware of that. Now, putting that aside, now we look at what's coming now. And I believe there is a time coming where, under this new administration with President Biden, which is going to take some time getting used to saying, President Biden, I don't trust him for a moment. I think he has an agenda that the church is going to come under incredible persecution over the next 4 years. And this is not a fear thing. This is looking at the policies and what they're about that tells me that this is probably coming. I believe that they will reverse some of the protections that Donald Trump did. I believe that they will come after 501c3s and silence any of them that speak out against any sins. If you speak out against homosexuality, if you speak out against congressional members or policies, these things are going to be stripped away. And what they will do, and I've been saying this for probably almost 20 years, and some people have listened, some people have not. What they will do is they will threaten churches with IRS. And they will say, look, you either stop doing this or else we will strip your 501c3. And you will now be a taxed entity. And I believe this is coming wholeheartedly. I have actually no doubt that at some point it's going to come. Will it come under Donald Trump or under President Biden? I don't know. But I do believe it's coming, and I believe it's coming very quickly in terms of America's history and future, okay? This is something, and you can go find this. There's been bills put forward throughout government to already do this, where if you're a pastor and you speak out against homosexuality, they want to pull your 501c3 status. Texas has had some of this. If you guys saw that movie God's Not Dead, I think it was the third one where they dealt with this, where they came after the churches and said, we want to see copies of your sermons so that we can see, are you actually acting in good faith? Are you doing hate speech? Whatever. This is a reality. This is something that's coming. It's something I've been watching for many, many years. It's all there. It just hasn't been put into complete action. We did see it in Canada. Canada did this already. They arrested some pastors for speaking out against homosexuality. It was a very big deal. And this was probably about 10 years ago. They arrested a pastor or two for doing this. Switzerland has had this happen. So this is coming. And there's some things that the church can do to protect themselves, but that's a whole other video. That's not what I'm getting at today. My point right now is that this persecution is coming. And we lost the election, okay? The Republicans, the conservatives, whatever side you want to call yourself, we lost the election. Partly why we lost it was because pastors and Christians don't have a backbone and gave up because they didn't want to look bad. And so I believe completely that many people, they didn't vote for Trump just because. They didn't want to look a certain way. They didn't want to have a certain reflection on their own life. And this is ridiculous because now we've got, and I actually had a conversation with a pastor who told me that he was not going to vote for Donald Trump because he felt Donald Trump was a bad guy and had bad ethics. Now, let's look at Joe Biden and look at some of his ethics as things come forward. Him and his son Hunter and all this garbage that's going on with China and probably Russia as well, and all this side dealing and everything like that. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on too that we're not getting into in this video. My point is that pastors, this guy specifically that I talked to told me, well, I won't vote for him. And I said, well, what about the persecution that's going to come under Biden? And his return to me on that was, well, I guess we earned it. No, we didn't earn it. And one of the things, too, that's really bothered me is all these prophetic voices that supposedly came out saying that Donald Trump was going to be president again, and then he isn't. And so some of these people now are changing their story. If they change their story, throw them out as a prophet. That they're not legit. What I believe truly happened was God said, I'm going to do this, and certain biblical mandates still applied, and people didn't do it. If you humble yourself and pray for your nation, pray for your leaders, all those kinds of things, they were thrown out. Now, also, though, you have these pastors who decided to do whatever they wanted and ignored the prophetic voices. And please trust me, I weigh out prophetic voices. I don't just listen to every prophet on TV. I've actually gotten in arguments with people. I have people that don't like me anymore because I called out their prophets, okay? I am not somebody who falls for every prophetic word that comes down the line. I weigh them out. I test them, and I look to see what else has this person said over the years. The ones that were true that said Donald Trump was going to be president, that's the one that I struggle with. Why were they so far off? And I'm starting to come to the conclusion they weren't off. They were actually on. God's plan was for Donald Trump. But the reality is that I think the church abandoned the prophetic voices. They decided to do their own thing. Many pastors had their own agendas. They didn't want to see Donald Trump as president again, or they just didn't like Donald Trump. And they didn't think he was a good representation of the faith, and they didn't want to lead people astray, whatever their nonsense is. But these things took place, and because of that, because the church turned its back, that's where the cost came in. I think that's somewhat of what happened. I'm not saying 100% for sure, but I think that's what happened. Some of you pastors literally just signed the dotted line for your church. Your church will probably come to an end in the near future because of some of the things you did. Although some of you will sell out because some of you don't have the guts to stand up for biblical truths. And when it comes down to the brass tacks and the money side of things, you'll sell out. You will. And congregational members need to start watching their church. If some of this persecution comes the way I think it is, and you start seeing your church is not standing up for biblical truth, walk away, go find a new pastor. Go find a new ministry. Call your pastor out. Say you are selling yourself out. You're selling out the faith. You're selling out what the things Christ has called you to do, the things Christ has put on our lives, and then walk away. Because it is not going to be a fair thing for you to stay there and to continually support it yourself. So there is a time coming where we are going to have to literally do our work and really work hard to stand up for biblical truths. And some of you pastors aren't going to do it. And the congregation members that do watch this need to pay attention, because it's not right. It's not correct. And things need to be done to kind of realign the church so that we are paying attention to God, even if God calls us to do something we don't like, okay? If you look through the Old Testament, how many times did God call these people to do something they didn't like? Oh, go to this land. No, there's giants there. We don't want to deal with the giants. Okay, well, fine, don't go there. And these things where the people didn't want to deal with what God was calling them to do, and that's what we have to pay attention to. Sometimes God will call us to do something that we don't. One of the final things that drives me nuts is I hear all these Christians, I'll say, well, God doesn't put anybody in leadership, well, Israel had bad kings. They had bad judges. They fell under bad leadership from other countries. And most of the time it was because they weren't in the will of God. They did their own thing. They decided to do their own thing. And they had to, own their own mistakes. And for some of us, that's exactly what's happening here and now, is that I think we are now going to have to pay for our mistakes as Christians. And it's not the whole body. I know many of the body, but I think also some of the body is responsible because they worship Donald Trump. And the worship of Donald Trump also turned many people off and the Christian thing. But if you didn't vote for Trump because you thought he was unethical, you wait until you see what this new party is going to have in play and what they're going to do to you and your ministry friends, your ministry, whatever, the things they're going to make it difficult, your tax dollars paying for abortions and other stuff, and just disgusting abortions. I mean, abortion itself is disgusting, but the things that these people want to put into play, these partial birth abortions or full-term abortions of up to 2 years old in some cases, and you think, well, what's that? Yes, I sat in some trainings. One of the things that was interesting was I sat in a training one time that was put out by the Obama administration that said part of going green was population control. And at the same time, President Obama hired somebody that was under the title of Science Czar, and you can look this up, who had one time wrote a paper where he said that we should be able to kill adults after a certain age because they don't give back to society, and we should be able to abort babies up to 2 years old because they don't have any impact on society at that point. So yes, there is definitely some disgusting things coming, and if you voted for Biden, own it, because you are the reason why these disgusting things come. And I will have no sympathy for anybody who complains and then tells me they voted for Biden and they're upset that these things are happening. It is your fault. It was all there. You didn't do your research. Own it. Some of you pastors, you sold out, and you are now going to reap what was brought to you, and it's going to be on you. It is your responsibility. When your church closes, it was your fault. You alone, because you didn't take a stand and stand up for the things that you should have stood up for. Again, I am not saying Donald Trump was anybody to worship. I don't even know if he's necessarily a great person in God's eyes. I don't know. All I know is that he was doing things to protect the church, and I think he was making strides to correct his life. There's a big change between Trump of year 1 and Trump of year 4. I think there's a huge difference if you look at some of his more recent speeches and things like that. But if you sold out on him, the things that are coming your way are not going to be good. So pray about it, because you're going to have to start praying forgiveness and asking God what to do in preparation for what's to come. So that's my thing for today. Be blessed. And this was a hectic little yap, but it's something that's true. And some of you're going to have to own up to what you did. And the rest of us, we have to pray and just ask God to intervene in whatever way he possibly can. So thank you for watching. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and invite other people to follow our channel. All right, thank you, and be blessed.